All right. All right, we'll do it live.
We're doing it.
Laura
I'm alive.
Laura Newsome, Laura Nerdsome. Call her by any name. She's awesome.
That's right.
How are you doing today, Laura?
I'm great. I'm doing good. I dropped some foster kittens off for surgery today, so I got a kitten mission under my wings for the day already. So.
Oh wow, very cool. Well, you've already done more today than I have. It's nice to see you in your NX shirt.
Yes.
The light blue.
Yes, it's one of the speaker shirts from last year. It's what I really, really appreciate about it is it's lady cut, so I don't look like a box in it.
Yeah.
A lot of we don't get a lot of that from the from conferences. It's almost always unisex.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I guess men are mainly built like boxes, so.
Yeah. You know, like, and women just aren't. And yeah, it's the hips. It's like what does it for me is like it goes out in the area where I could go in, and then it goes in the area where I need it to go out. So it's like opposite. But anyway.
Yeah, that's so fun. Well, I'm glad we got the right cut for you.
Yeah.
So that's the one from NXConf last year. Is that
yes.
Correct?
Yes. Cool. NX22 and in Phoenix. So that was really great. One of my favorite conferences, honestly. And I am like, yeah, because it was it was like intimate, you know, because it was mostly a virtual event, and then there were a few people that were in person, and it was just really great. So I'm and then I'll be in New York coming up here at the end of September, and I'm really excited. Like I've never been to New York, so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, really? You've never been to New York?
I've never been to New York. I've never needed to, you know, so it's just, and, you know, when I was, you know, in my like 20s and 30s, I was so broke. I wasn't going to, like, we lived in Los Angeles, so we spent all our money to go home to Iowa to see our family. And so there wasn't money to also go to New York. So now I'm like, yeah, I'll go to New York. So it'll be fun. I'm going to be on stage with Philip. I'm really excited for that.
Philip is a great host. So
Philip is a great host. He's a lot of fun. He's just a lot of like good energy, and yeah. So
yeah. Well, so we used to do like weekly meetings here internally, and we'd always look forward to when Philip would be hosting them, because he's always very slick on the mic.
Yeah.
But yeah, shout out to Shri. Hello. Hope you're doing well. We'll get started here in just a little bit. We'll give people a little bit of a chance to file in. But yeah, like Laura said, coming up soon. A little bit more than a month away. We'll have NXConf in New York City.
Yeah, it'll be great. I know. I'm really excited. One of my teammates from Cisco is going to be there speaking. Adrian Barron is going to speak about CI/CD pipelines. Awesome. He's done so much work on our pipeline work. And so I'm really excited to get to hear what he has to say. Literally could not do it without him at work.
So many cool people in this lineup. Let's see.
Oh, it's such a great lineup. Like Craigery's there, Michael, Brandon. Yeah. So we had a very interesting implementation, and they've worked really hard to improve our process, and definitely Adrian has seen some things. So
yeah, very cool. So based in Chicago, like that. Let's see. What is CPX?
That is the application that we work on is essentially, so if you own Cisco hardware and you want to get information about your Cisco hardware or software or your licenses or subscriptions, right? We build and maintain a website that gives you insights into that. So like, are there security warnings on or security advisories on your hardware? Is there a bug you need to deal with? Is your software coming to the end of life? Is, you know, that kind of information. And so we're Cisco currently has a lot of small applications that help people manage their Cisco gear, to put it shortly. And we're in the process of making it a one-stop shop, right? So people can
Right.
do all the things they need to do to manage their Cisco software, hardware licenses in one place. And we do use NX Monorepo with our application. That was an architectural decision that Alex Akrushko made when he joined. Oh gosh, it's almost been 3 years now since he joined Cisco.
I remember when he used to be at Firebase still.
Yeah, yeah.
He went from there to y'all, right?
Yeah, he did. And it's been really great to work with him. I I don't know if y'all remember a few years ago on Twitter, he just recruited like pretty much every Angular developer.
There you go.
So yeah, so we have a great team that I work with. And since we've got about 150 devs that work in the same repo.
Well, that's definitely where you start needing similar tools.
Yep. So NX has helped us immensely to kind of just streamline our processes, get our CI/CD pipeline in shape, enforce boundaries, all that stuff. So yeah.
Well, this is very interesting to me too. Training Muay Thai, that's too intense for me, but good for Adrian.
I don't even know what it is, but
I like keeping my brain cells. I think it's a sport where you kick other people in the head, and you get kicked in the head by other people. So
nice.
Not my jam.
Yeah, I need to protect all my brain cells because every cell is precious.
Absolutely. Shout out to Michael. Michael was on earlier this week,
nice,
talking about Lighthouse, all kinds of stuff I didn't even realize about it. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I've really been digging into Lighthouse lately, and it's such a great tool.
It's a lot deeper than I thought. Like I was telling Michael, what I associate Lighthouse is like that thing I do every once in a while just to make sure. Like
I go in and check and be like, okay, yeah, my main bundle size looks okay.
Yeah. Okay. As long as my scores aren't like red, I'm like, it'll do. But yeah. Very cool. Let me say hi to more people here in chat. Amen Adventures, welcome. Hope you have a good adventure with us today, Gavin. Shout out. But yeah, so yeah, let's maybe transition from this to more of what we were looking to talk about today, Laura, which was NX for junior engineers.
Yeah.
So what's I working with Cisco, working with your team. You said how many people were there? 150?
I think it's like 150. I'm just throwing out a random number. I'm sure people at Cisco are like, no, you're wrong, but it's over 100. There's a lot of us. We have teams across the globe. So we've got teams in India, we've got teams in Poland, every time zone in the United States, several, also Canada. So yeah, we've got kind of teammates all over.
Where would you put, like, if you're to distribute this, like a rough pie chart, senior versus maybe mid versus junior, how would that look, would you expect?
So I can speak specifically to my team. My team, we've got a fairly even distribution. The first few years when we were kind of trying to get the existing application sort of worked into shape, we hired heavy on the senior engineering side. But now that we've got some good patterns established, and we've got, now that we've got we've got the application kind of working better. Now we're in the position where we do hire. We've got, like, for my team, for example, I've got I am a track lead for two of my I like it for two teams, and each of my teams has a senior engineer, and then like two mid-level engineers, and then we have either new hire, fresh out of college, or interns. So yeah.
Spell senior and junior wrong. So you said one senior,
like two mid-level,
two mid, and then one
to two juniors, honestly. And then I've got two teams that look like that, and so I'm obviously also a senior, so it's like 1.5 seniors. So but there are other teams that are more like a little larger. So under my specific org, we've got another team that's got, oh gosh, they've got at least 3 seniors. We've got an architect level engineer on that team as well. And then there's a handful of mid-level and then a handful of junior and seniors. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So what I try to do with my team is just, take the time. I've just started office hours. And so that's been, it's sort of an experiment to see how it goes. And this, I'm sure I'll have to kind of tweak it. But right now I make myself available 2 hours every Monday. Just pop in if you want to. Like, you can watch me code. I can code with you. We can solve a problem. Sometimes I just go ahead and explain things like NX to them. So, and that's where I actually started thinking about this topic that we wanted to talk about today, which is NX for junior engineers, because I realized that when you walk into a monorepo, it's kind of a little intimidating, right? You're like,
I'd be very interested. You mentioned your office hours. How many of those questions kind of revolve around NX versus maybe some other technical stuff? And shout out to Jorge real quick before we jump into that. But yeah,
nice.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I've only been doing it for a couple of weeks now. Well, maybe about a month, I guess. And so we've had 2 things sort of happen recently. Our teams got sort of restructured. We kind of shuffled some people around. And then we also brought in, so Cisco does this great program where it's like a postgraduate program. So once you've graduated from college, they hire you, you're hired, but you go through this program to they teach you how to like run a meeting and make a presentation, like all that dumb stuff that you don't necessarily pick up in computer science classes. That you really do need to, like, that's what really helps you kind of stand out as an engineer and, professionally. And so they go through that program. And then when they're done with that program, they are employed at Cisco as like an entry-level engineer.
Okay. So that's not for, like, if you were to hire a senior, they likely wouldn't go through a similar program. That's just for these
or they may have gone through it and just worked their way up through the system, So we do have quite a few people that stay at Cisco for a long time, right? So but yeah, and then sometimes the senior and the mid will flip-flop. It just kind of depends, how long people have been there. But yeah, so in the meeting, so we have some early career devs. We've got some new, like some post-grad training program devs as well. And so like in one of them, for example, I just went through, one of the questions was, can you just tell me about our Monorepo? Like, I don't know anything about NX. And I'm like, that is fair. So, like they weren't sure like how to use a generator, what parts of, like, what made a monorepo NX, like what part of this is NX and what part of this is Angular, right?
Yeah.
And frankly, like, to be clear, before I started at Cisco, I had never had the opportunity to work with NX. And it was kind of intimidating. Like, I was hired as a senior engineer and I'm like, they're going to expect me to know all this stuff and I don't know anything about it. And so that was kind of a lot.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And then we were starting in, let's just break up the app into libraries. And we're like, okay, let's just do that then, and luckily somebody I worked with on my team knew the process to do that. And so he got that started, but then, what happens if you take a very large, lots and lots of code monolithic repository and try to simply put it all in libraries, right?
Yeah.
Like, it becomes,
it's not
chaos.
easy.
It's not easy. And then you realize, like, oh shoot, we got a whole bunch of circular dependencies. We didn't really think through how we wanted to structure this. Like, we just simply moved the code.
Right.
And so it's like, and then at that point we're like, well, I guess we kind of need a strategy here. So, then you start to develop strategies, and it's been interesting. I'm glad I joined Cisco when I did, because I've kind of seen this grow and change. It's like we didn't even have a library generator that could, I mean, when we first were making libraries, you could use the basic NX generator. It worked fine, except it didn't work with our Monorepo, right? Like there were things we had to do to get it to work, mostly to get our tests to run and stuff like that, because, we had specific lint files that, linting that we wanted to run. We use a weird selector for Cypress. So like there were just certain setup steps. We had a ton of Lodash. So in order to be able to run the unit tests, we had to get Lodash in there. And so there were just like weird dependencies that needed to be brought in every time.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting because I guess the message that I keep kind of zeroing in on when I get asked the question, what is NX? It's always a hard question because there's so many things that NX is. It's not just a task runner, but it is a task runner. It's not just a Monorepo tool, but it is a Monorepo tool. It's not just, a lot of things. So
right.
It makes it hard to like get it down to one sentence. So when I have to get it down to one sentence, what NX is it's about getting all of the chores that you normally have to do that's not working on your app and getting them out of the way, automating them as best as we can so that you can focus on doing your job, which is building an awesome product for your customers. So
yeah, I like that. I noticed Jorge in the chat was asking, Cisco, we do trunk-based development. So
I don't know what Git Flow is.
I don't either, but I know we do trunk-based development.
Okay, cool. I don't know what it if it has a name or whatever, but the workflow I prefer to do is just like you fork a repo, you make a branch off of main, and then commit it in. I think that's trunk-based, but I'm not sure. So
yeah, I'm looking up the difference. There's a lot of diagrams on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to anything with Git, it's like there's a lot of tools that are useful. There's a lot of commands, like especially as you get better with Git, there's definitely a lot of power that comes there. But at the end of the day, most of the time, it's like you can get the most. You can get like everything you need out of Git with just a very like top level understanding, I feel like.
Yeah. I think the day I felt like a real senior engineer was the day I understood how to rebase. I was like, this is some like next level, get it. Like, yeah, I'm doing it. Cause like the first time you go to rebase against main and you've got a bunch of merge conflict, like it's so hard to kind of just understand like, oh, it's just playing back your commits over main. And anytime it runs into a merge conflict, it tells you and you have to fix it. But I'd be like, wait, that, because I was like, when I first did it, I'm like, oh, it's doing the last commit against all of them. Like, no, it's like step by step doing each commit. And so don't freak out if it looks weird. You just need the end product to match.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah.
The difference between rebase and merge and just understanding like at the end of the day, it's a linked list pretty much. It's like, we can get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Jorge has another question here. How is adopting NX on consolidate and mature projects? So, or I guess you've kind of, as you were mentioning, it sounds like your team's kind of been through this.
Yes.
So you may have a good answer here.
Yeah, and so so the immediate benefits. So my team was one of the first teams to actually get our section of code out of the main app and into a library. Right. And so the immediate benefit that we saw is that we could actually run code coverage on just our files. Like we could finally run our unit tests. Like, because when we initially started the unit tests, if you tried to run the unit test suite locally, your entire office would just like heat up, and then your computer would start like leaking tears because it took up so much CPU just to run and then it would run for like 5 hours. So it was impossible to run them locally. And there were many reasons for that, that we've since much improved. But for myself, it was kind of like getting our code into a library gave us a lot more control over our little section of the world, right? So we could run our unit tests locally. We could actually get accurate code coverage on our library itself, which also meant then that instead of using the lower coverage metrics that were required, that, because we had fairly low coverage metrics on the app as a whole because of the state of the existing application. But once we pulled our stuff out, we could set higher code coverage settings on our library. So if anyone went to merge anything in there, we could, if they didn't write tests, it wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
And then it also allowed us to kind of set very specific rules for our library so that we were able to work towards end goals faster.
Yeah.
So
for your own library.
Yeah. And then it also we use code owners. We have a code owners file so that, if somebody wants to merge to my library, they have to get permission from my team. But it makes that a little clearer too, because a lot of times when you're dealing with I'll say legacy, even though maybe it's just a few years old, but a massive monolithic app, sometimes it's hard to see the boundaries of the individual units of code, right? So getting it pulled out into a library makes it really easy. Like if it's in this assets folder, it belongs to my team. No touch.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think this one in particular, you mentioned when your office would heat up because you're running unit tests, and you have one command for that in some setups. I think the typical Angular CLI application, when you create your app that way, you've got one test. Is this still Karma that they run?
We use Jest. Yeah, we use Jest. Yeah, Karma is still technically the Angular default, right? But they're moving away from it.
I don't recall. I've been away from Angular for a while now, so I don't remember.
I know
I feel
that
Karma may have been sunset, but I don't.
I think that they're right in the middle. Like I'm sure we'll see more about it in the next release for Angular.
Okay.
But yeah, we use Jest, and we pair that with Angular testing library. We follow a Cypher's unit testing pattern, and then we just love Shai Resnick has the two Observer Spy and Jest Auto Spies. So those were sort of new additions, and so those dramatically improved the quality of our tests. So we had a lot of really leaky, flaky tests before, and tests that would just run forever because nothing was actually mocked.
Right. That makes sense. Well, I don't know. I do like the idea of not mocking code. I feel like that's a weird thing in the Angular community because it feels like people like mocking stuff.
Yeah. I like to mock the services. I don't want to make HTTP requests. Our dev that would just destroy our with all of us running to unit tests all the time. It would.
I think that one for sure. Unless you have some really in-depth end-to-end tests, which I think is valid too. I think when you get to a network request, that's where most of these tests, if you're seeing the front end as a node in the system, once you start doing the network request, that's where you should definitely start mocking something.
Yeah, and that's generally my rule of thumb is if it's going to make a request outside of my hermetically sealed system, then I don't need, that's not a unit test anymore. That's more of an end-to-end test. And so for the unit tests, I can go either way. I've lived in the world where you mock nothing, and I've lived in the world where you mock everything. And I kind of just find a happy medium. If you've got a pure function and you know what to expect it to return, then you don't need to mock that function, right? It's going to be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, if it's too difficult to predict what's going to come out of the function, and it doesn't matter what comes out of it, it's just that something came out of it, then I'm more likely to be okay, I'm going to mock this because I don't need to take the time to unit or to figure out what's going to come out of it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. The thing that always gets me is I think that your test should be able to withstand refactoring. And what I see and what I did too, like it's not just other people. This is what I had done too. I identified as a problem was like the lines where I drew, where I said, this is a service, this is part of the component, this is part of a different service. And I would mock a service that was getting injected to the component. But then that test does not withstand any kind of refactoring of the lines of that component versus the service, or like a parent to a child component. So somewhere down the line you refactor it so that it's inside, they're collapsed into one component. Like unit tests tend to not withstand those kinds of things, and I think they should. So
yeah, it's hard to find. Like I feel like it's sort of the evergreen problem, right? Of how deep do I test this? And because I've definitely been in this situation with like Node APIs where I did not do deep testing, and then I specifically had a Node API that was still like it wasn't TypeScript, it was JavaScript, and I didn't do deep testing, and we would break, like something would break between like a type would change, and then nothing was catching it except the final end-to-end test, and it's like, okay, so maybe I can like find a happy medium.
Maybe I don't know.
Go crazy and use TypeScript instead, which is the better answer in that case.
Let's not go crazy here, Laura. But no, actually, so what you mentioned there, that's kind of where I feel myself gravitating towards more and more, where I don't think unit tests matter so much because they can break and like things are fine, but end-to-end tests, I feel like that's where you get most of your confidence from. That's where you get this kind of you get this kind of thing where you can refactor, so not make any change other than like changes to the code, and things should still work. And that should end-to-end tests should be resilient enough to fit those. So
yeah, definitely. And I think I also like the idea of the component testing layer.
I'm back and forth on that one over and over again, because like I said, I don't like any test that mandates the lines around which a component are drawn, because I feel like those are actually very loose. So those should be considered dotted lines, and as soon as you put a unit test around those, that's a very solid line, it feels like to me. But I do agree with a lot of some of the core of the motivation here, which seems to me to be the interface that you're testing is the DOM, which I actually think is perfect. Like, especially in Angular, I see so many times people are testing the class.
And then you've got all these unit tests, and it turns out like none of the methods even matter, and like the component properties don't do anything, and you're like, cool. So I'm just running unit tests against code that never gets hit in production. Literally cannot get hit in production.
Well, and even like if when you get to testing the class, like sometimes I see just people mocking methods on that class. I'm just like, what are you doing at that point?
Like spying on the actual component.
Exactly. But alternatively, like interacting with the DOM as your interface that you're testing, I like that. I like you should be interacting with it as a user would be. So if you can write your test this way, and like any kind of code, I actually think should be considered black box. Like there should be nothing inside of your test, or you shouldn't have a test to say like this method works correctly. Like you shouldn't even know there's methods. Like you should just know here's my component.
I click this button, this thing happens.
Yeah, when you click that button, let's make sure this thing happens. That's all it should be.
Looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, let's start with Shree's here. So this was, I think you mentioned this a little bit, Laura. So example of how to restrict a lib from other team members.
And so we actually do, it's less restricting, it's more, we just do a code owners file. So in GitHub, if you just look up GitHub code owners, basically we have teams, we have GitHub teams. And so anything you can restrict by the directory or by the actual file. And the restriction is not that people can't read it or make changes to it. It's that if they pull request a change that touches anything in that directory or file, they have to get approval from the code owner. And so what that has done for us that was very helpful, we had a lot of problems where we had teams that were not, the boundaries of the teams weren't clearly defined. And so they would get tickets on their board to say, go touch this thing over in this code in this that this other team owns. And so a lot of times we'd leave for the night, we'd come in the morning, and there'd be all this code that got merged. And we're like, where did this come from? Like, this isn't following the patterns we wanted it to follow. We'd find like unit tests that weren't actually testing stuff. And so by requiring pull requests on that were approved by us on our code, it allowed us to sort of, I don't really like the word gatekeeping, but it is true gatekeeping to say, yes, you can merge that, or no, you cannot merge this. You have to make these changes first. So that's really what I mean.
I think at the end of the day, I haven't touched or configured code owners in a while. Like code owners is another one of those things where once it's set up, it kind of just goes. So I believe it's just like there's like a codeowners.md file that's added to your code base.
Yeah, what is it?
And you just define like for these files, this is the team that owns it. And for these files, this is the team that owns it. And then you can configure team members for that and team owners. You can configure all kinds of rules around that too.
And you can do like individual contributors, even if you're just like, no, only I can approve this one. So yeah, it's a really powerful tool.
I feel like, well, it's probably worth mentioning. You don't need to use NX to use code owners.
Correct. Like that would go in our column of not NX, but useful. But NX makes it easier. Yeah. So yeah, so code owners is not NX, but NX can make it clearer what the boundaries are, right? Because if you are working in a specific library, it's a lot more clear to say, okay, this entire library belongs to Laura's team,
Oh. Solid draw problems.
There we go.
Libs. So libs, like libs, you could say libs. Projects is kind of the more generic term. I think we're gravitating more towards now.
Sure.
But, so code owners itself, not NX, but once the way like your libs or projects are going to work, they're essentially going to be directories inside of your larger monorepo. So once things have been sectioned off and put into like a different library, this way, like for example, Laura's team at Cisco could own like one specific project. I imagine you probably own multiple actually, but
I have a couple.
Okay.
So yeah.
Just two.
Just two. Well, I have two main features. But they're like kind of I'm not gonna lie, they're kind of a big deal.
Yeah. Well, I would expect nothing less, to be honest. But yeah, NX is providing tooling to be able to separate those things out in terms of creating or having generators. So the way this works is via the command line. You run a command like NX generate. Laura, I imagine y'all have your own custom generator that you run.
We do.
Yeah.
And that was like kind of honestly game changing for the organization to get that. So,
yeah. Well, I know we've had conversations in the past on this specific topic about just creating your own generators to take advantage of NX. But let's I'm trying to get my like VS Code up on the screen. Let me see if we can add that here.
You're good. I did want to add, so like the other thing that NX does with the libs is it glues it all together, right? Like it knows how to take a lib and be like, oh, you belong to this app needs this.
Right.
So
let's see. This directory or this whole repo is probably a mess right now, but we can still like get across the point. So like just like throwing away everything else, we could just run nxg and then run something. Let's make that even bigger. Actually, it's too small. This is the difference between me working on code and like me presenting on it. It's like font is 100 point versus
right,
like
right.
8.
Yeah, I did a Pluralsight course on Angular routing, and it was like, how big do I need to? Oh, that's really big. But they're like, yep, that's how big it's got to be. You're like,
yeah.
Okay,
It
then.
doesn't. It seems less too when you're doing it, but
Yeah.
but yeah. So you can do this via the command line. I always forget this stuff though too. So one of the tools that we have that I'm most excited about is this NX console tool. So
The
we have
NX
it for
console is great.
yes, it's perfect. So we can just come here and run our generate command, and this gives us a whole list of all the different generators that I have. So
Yeah.
if I want like my playwright generator here, we can do that. Or like, I don't know if I start typing in React, it'll give me all my different React generators. And
there's a whole library like for Angular. There's a whole library for React.
I don't think I have Angular in this.
If you aren't using Angular, you don't need it, right?
Right.
But if you new up a new Angular project with NX, it just ships with it. Otherwise, if there's a generator you want that you don't have, you can go get it and just install it. So that's because there are a lot of like community owned ones as well. So
and you can see here too, just in the tooling here. So with this repo actually predated. We now have actually official NX support for Playwright via an NX like first party Playwright plugin.
Nice.
But inside of this repo, I was using Playwright, so I just wrote my own like Playwright plugin just to do it. And you can see like that shows up here in my list. So the name of my repo is Aeons of Ascension. The name of the plugin is Playwright. And then the name of the generator here would be Playwright. So this all works to the point where I can like have my form and like see all the different options here that I can add to this. But yeah, the similar thing would be like for Laura, I imagine your thing would be at Cisco / app generator, project generator, something like that.
Yep.
And then you can pre-configure, like you're using Angular, obviously. You mentioned you use Jest, you mentioned you use Cypress. You can configure all these things so it just gets set up for you. So you're really just like the one click away from being ready to go.
So that was so Jorge had a question about like the main features that I liked about working with NX. And honestly, it was the division we talked about already, division into libraries, but also it's the generators. Like I said, I was anxious when I started. I didn't have a lot of experience with NX, and there's boilerplate, right? Like if you run one of those generators, there's boilerplate.
Get Brandon in here. You're summoning him right now.
I said that it's a terrible word, but like I have problems with the word boilerplate, right? Because I'm just like, people are like, there's boilerplate. I'm like, you mean the code to set it up? Like there is some code that you have to write. Like you have to write some code. It's just a thing, right? And so generators really exist to do that for you, right? Yeah. And so and if you're just doing an out of the box NX project using the generators, they're just going to work, right?
Yeah.
Something like Cisco, where we had a large existing monorepo with like we already had linting in place. We already had we used a different test ID selector to do to use with Angular testing library. That's actually where we used it with, not with Cypress. But and so there were like, we had some specialty things that we used to maintain this horrible Confluence document about, to be like, okay, once you make the library, now you got to go in and add this and take this out and move this here and do this. And then Sandy Barr actually joined our team and was like, no. We're going to have a generator that does all this dumb stuff for us.
Yeah.
And it was game changing because now you can just run that generator and, and it's actually using the generators that are maintained by NX. So every time we bump our version, we don't have to go in, like we're not writing an Angular generator. Like we're just kind of piggybacking on the generators that NX already maintains and then making them work for us.
Yeah.
And so
I'm really positive on our generator API.
Yeah.
Just because it's that composable to the point where like you can create your own generators using the ones that we provide, like Laura was saying.
Yeah. And I did a talk. That's actually what my talk was about last year at NXConf. Was just basically like take the Angular generator and go ahead and just like strip out any of the properties you don't care about.
Yeah.
Because like if you just run the default one, it gives you like 20 different options. And then your team's like, wait, do I do this? I don't know. Do I do this?
Yeah.
Like you get decision fatigue, right? Because you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I should be doing this. And then you
Yeah.
got to everybody. And so,
well,
you know,
and most of the times too, it's like, I think you mentioned this too, Laura, but like your instructions when creating a new library are like, run the ng generator command, set these options. And then after that's done, like do X, Y, and Z, like do all these other things afterwards. Like the whole goal of these generators is to do all these things for you. I've got Playwright, Tailwind, sorry, up on screen here. Because this is like one of my favorite examples of this. Like I love Tailwind, but getting it started is like it's kind of big deal. It's like there's all these files. It's a 5-step process. And like to their credit, 5 isn't that crazy. Like I feel like you go back maybe 5 years even, and it wouldn't be weird to see like in people's getting started, it's like a 20-step process.
Oh yeah, I don't know like if anyone has added Jest to an Angular application like 4 or 5 years ago. Like there were several like blog posts and it was just like it just seemed like a lot of it wasn't even really that bad, but it was just like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And
and like for Tailwind too, and I imagine this plays into the Jest conversation too. It's like this one will work if you're doing. I feel like this works if you kind of do like a very plain Vite or like create React app maybe setup. But as soon as you start doing interesting stuff where you have like your own post CSS and other stuff mixed in, it's like this stops working so great. So like the alternative here is coming back to NX. If we just run a generator and look for Tailwind, like we have one here. Like I just have the React plugins installed right now, but there's one for Angular as well. And it's basically just whoop, pasted something that I didn't mean to from the basement. Don't look at that. I guess that's just the link to the studio, so I can but yeah, it's really nice. Like you can just say, hey, I want to add it to one of these applications, and that's it. And like NX is going to end up doing all the things from this list, but it's like Turing complete. So we're going to do stuff like check if you already have post CSS put in there, and all this other stuff. So
it's really great. So it's like a junior dev joining an NX team. Like the generators are kind of your best friends, right? Because, or I'm saying junior, but I'm honestly like just anybody who's unfamiliar with NX, right? Like first question I'd ask is, do we have generators that we prefer to use? And if your team does not have generators, and they have a Confluence document that they hand you to say, once you run the generator, do all this stuff, then it's time to start talking about making your own, they call them local plugins, right? Like generator plugin, kind of same thing.
Well, a plugin is kind of like how we extend NX. Like I think that's kind of where we're moving towards. It's like it's not so much about plugins; it's about how do you extend NX. And there's some things that you can provide. Like there's some ways that some interfaces almost that you can provide to extend NX. One is like this generator API where we say this is how you create new files, how you create new code, that kind of stuff. But there's also executors. This is a way of creating specific tasks and giving like people a very specific interface using like TypeScript schemas in terms of, what are the options like for this command. And that's another great way of, extending on NX. The other one is like more, you probably won't use this unless you're using like NX with a different language or like a new framework that we don't have support for yet, but it's ways of figuring out the project graph. So maybe we can come back to like this example and I can just open up the project graph.
Yes.
And like this is like the secret sauce behind NX. And like this here it's like maybe a pretty picture, maybe a confusing picture. Like
I will not show our project graph because it's
massive, I imagine.
Oh man, you can't see anything. It's just like a dense little cluster of spider webs.
Yeah. Well, and to the graph team's credit, so we can just run NX graph. The built-in graph for like VS Code is great, but it's missing just a few features that we can actually get when we go to
Yes.
the full graph here, which is we can actually like focus in on this specific project. This makes things a little bit more manageable.
Yeah, we use that feature a lot. And so what this is showing, like, so this kind of, if you're not really sure what this is showing, it looks like gobbledygook. Like, it's like, what? Okay, I see a graph, but I don't know what this is doing. But it's just basically showing how all the pieces of your app are connected together, right? And so if you are new to a project and you've just opened it and it's NX, open it up and run NX graph, it'll take you here, and just like, you're not going to break anything. Just go look at it. And libraries, apps are going to be varying states of complexity. Cisco, like I said, it's thousands of libraries and lines going this way and that. But what you don't want is the circular dependency, right?
Right.
And so circular dependency is when one library depends on another library that depends on it.
Yeah. Well, and beyond just like the picture, like beyond like this is sending us signals that we can maybe read when it's not so complicated. We can say, okay, we can see how these different applications like depend on each other. But really, like the reason that this project graph exists isn't for us to look at it. It's actually to inform like the way NX is going to run tasks. So this is maybe actually less important for Angular, because Angular is still kind of under this idea of a monolithic build at the end of the day for your app. But like in React applications, like I'm essentially building each one of these libraries individually using the asset created from that when I'm then packaging everything up into my application. But like the idea is when I'm doing something like that, I have to make sure, like if I'm running a build on my application here, that, for example, like I can't run that application until this is built, right?
Yes.
I can't run this until like this is built. So if you have to manually configure like the order in which those things have to happen, like you're going to have a bad time, because you're going to have to make sure you're on top of that. Make sure you're always remembering, hey, always build these things first, then always build these things, then that. And if you ever want to change the way some of your code depends on each other, you're going to have to adjust that manually, or else things are going to break. Versus what NX does is like, we're not doing anything to build this graph. Like me as a developer, I'm just using NX, and NX is reflecting to me what my project graph actually looks like, because NX is analyzing our source code, looking at all the import statements, and that's how this graph gets created. So I can just code and I can just do stuff. And this means any kind of pipelines I have for running my builds or running tests or my lints or anything like that, it's just going to like, NX is going to make sure that that keeps up with me as I just do my job. So NX is making sure like all of that other stuff, all the chores, all of like the setting up Jest, all the setting up Tailwind, all these things that are like not really giving value to your customers, we're helping to take care of those things.
Yeah, they're doing all that DX stuff that makes your job easier at the end of the day. So, and that's so this is great. Like, and Just does indeed configure Angular for you, which that was honestly the first. Like, I remember when it was several years ago, I was told that, and I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like, I'm just gonna, because honestly, even if you're just gonna do a little personal project, like you can just make it in NX. It's not like it's not a whole lot of overhead. It's not like you're adding some really heavy dependency, but then you get all these like nice. There's all these nice things that you get. You get the tool, like it sets up the tools for you.
So like NX, maybe to Yadiel's point, like NX will set these things up for you. They'll get these things up and running. We're not at the end of the day, like we're not writing Jest. We're just there. We see like Jest puts out a CLI, and we figure out, okay, these are the things you have to do to set Jest up, and this is what you have to do for a completely new project, but this is what you have to do to migrate stuff from Karma to Jest, and we can automate those a little bit. I don't think we can like do everything for you, but we can at least set up the files,
the configuration and stuff.
Yeah.
And the same thing too, like for example, when Angular puts out a new version, or Vue, or any of the JavaScript frameworks that have NX supported generators, anytime a new version comes out, you have a team that updates those generators. So it's like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So then all I have to do is bump my version, and all I have to do. It's never quite that simple, right? But especially on a very large project, and that's the stuff that like Adrian's team does for us, which I am always ever so grateful for. But yeah, it's like it kind of. It's like a buffer between all like the changing world, so
the migrations, let's add migrations to the list.
Yes,
migrations are interesting because really at the end of the day, migrations are generators, but they're specifically like generators around upgrading your workspace. So we'll make sure to include them whenever there's breaking changes to NX. So usually when you see those major versions bump in NX, that's when you'll see, hey, here's some new migrations. The idea is you just run NX migrate, our NX migrate command. It's going to walk you through how to do all these things. So like we create a migrations.json file for you. This way you can kind of review like what we're about to do. And then you run nx migrate -- run migrations. And we're actually going to run all those. At the end of the day, those are just generators. So what it is, like a generator is just an automated way. It's like code gen, I guess. It's like we're going to take your repo and we're going to add stuff to your the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to just like make sure you do a fresh commit before you run the migrations. And then once it's done, you drop another commit. And that's pretty much what the generator does. It's just like, hey, we made these changes to your code base.
Do you like
Here
them?
it is. Yeah. That commit was like thanks to NX, essentially.
I'd say that's my best advice to like somebody, and honestly anyone using NX, is before you run any of the generators or any of those tools, commit first.
Give yourself commit, because that'll give yourself a way to go back to it.
It's so easy to just
considering for a long time a way of just like undoing a generate, and we're just like, no. If anything, I think one thing we could do at some point is adding an option to like drop a commit before running a generator. That might be interesting. To do it automatically. But actually, if you use the migrations, there is an option inside the migrations to actually drop commits between each individual migration too, which is
okay. Well. Interesting. So, because then if one of them didn't work, you could just roll it back.
You could actually, like, if you're a master of Git, like Laura is apparently.
Really, I can rebase and everything.
Can you cherry pick?
I can.
Nice. You can pretty much like if you're into manipulating that linked list, you can like just pull one of these nodes out at this point. One of the generators. If that one caused issues, you can just say, hey, jettison that one commit. Let's go back to let's do all of them but that one, essentially.
Definitely.
So very cool. We got a question here. This is an Angular one.
Yes.
I am actually still a GDE in Angular, but I don't know stuff about Angular anymore. I haven't been keeping up. So I'll give this one to you, Laura. You're a GDE as well. Right?
I am a GDE. So to become an expert in Angular, like the best thing to do is to hook into the community. So you can do that through social media. We used to have a sort of more impressive Twitter, X, whatever presence. But honestly, like even on something like LinkedIn, there's quite a bit of, like we've got like Brandon Roberts, Michael Hodaki, like there's, oh gosh, I can't think of his name. There's quite a few of the GDEs that really take the time to put out good content and keep people sort of up to date on what's coming and like what's new. But it's also really important to learn the basics. So you can start for free on the Angular docs. They have a whole like tour of heroes. You can go through that. I will shamelessly plug Pluralsight because I do have a course on Pluralsight. But honestly, that's how I learned. I went through Deborah Kurata's Pluralsight courses, and they're great. And that's another way, just kind of figuring out the way that you learn best. There are free Angular courses online. If you're ever like, is this a good Angular course? You can pop a question on LinkedIn, and people will most likely, like LinkedIn, Twitter, Threads, whatever, people will answer you. And yeah, it's really just kind of the best way to learn it is to just use it. So, because that's, but yeah, it's hard to learn it if you don't have a problem you're trying to solve with it. Mm-hmm. But I'd say that's the same for any new framework or new language that you're trying to use. So
I think learning styles has a lot to play into it. For me personally, if I try to learn X, like let's not talk about Angular, but if I try to learn like X thing, I'm just like, what's one of the projects I've always wanted to build? Yes. And let's scope that down to something reasonable so I can actually finish that. But then let's build it in, I don't know, like one of the ones I've been doing recently is Solid. Next.js, I did something in that recently, that kind of thing. So I think that's a good way. My favorite way is to just hands-on, get your hands dirty, build something, actually see what's going on. Like tutorial hell is don't live there. Like visit there, but don't live there.
I think that's actually what I liked about something like Pluralsight, where you've got a video directory that's like chaptered out, and you could easily like grab it and be like, okay, I just need to rewatch this one little part.
All a part learning. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that. Okay, so the dirty little secret, it's not even a dirty little secret. Like the little secret that I want to tell to like junior engineers or people that are learning NX, if you're joining a project and NX is already set up, there's really not much you have to do. Like, you need to find out how to make a new library. That's like, I would learn how to make a new library, find out how they're doing it. Like, do they have their own generator? Do they have a crappy, do they have a very detailed Confluence document, and then really it's just understanding, that, okay, now my main app is here and then my libraries are here in this libs folder, right? And so it's just sort of understanding the structure. Especially if you're a junior dev, like you really should, I'd like to think you're not going to be the ones working on the pipeline. But I would say overall, I think there's more documentation out there. So if you are a person who is implementing NX at your company and you don't know what you're doing, I think there's a lot like NX that like y'all do a great job of putting out content for people to help with specific problems. There's a whole like Discord channel that you can join. There's like all these places that you can go.
At the moment, it's actually a Slack channel. But
Slack channel, thank you. I'm like, wait, I'm saying that.
We're migrating to Discord here very soon.
Nice.
That's what I've been working on for a little bit. So
you're like, how'd you know, Laura? And I'm like, I'm just an idiot and I didn't remember because I have so many spaces in there. But yeah, so it's like the community is there. And so I would say the learning curve is lower because it's so widely adopted and so supported by the community that you're going to get your questions answered if you ask them.
Right.
So
I do think some of this comes down to context too. Like especially, so Laura's at Cisco, so that's obviously a larger enterprise company. You mentioned your team has 150 roughly engineers working on it. I think mostly if you're a junior entering that context, the learning curve of NX is do what the seniors tell you to do.
Exactly.
Like the seniors will have put
the rules and follow them.
Probably. Yeah. Just like follow those rules. And if you're in a different context where you are a more junior engineer, but you're in a smaller company where you have much more responsibilities, the learning curve of NX in that scenario is learn the mental model. Like what's going on? Like how does an NX monorepo work? It's kind of like you make building blocks and then you have tasks for those building blocks and you use the fact that there are building blocks to like configure pipelines for you and make it so that like all these things that Laura's Cisco team is doing because they have the resources like, linting and testing and all this stuff to make sure things are super solid. I think you can really get that at a junior team, or not at a junior team, but at a smaller team, because you're using NX. So
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you don't even really have to have a super fancy pipeline. Like you can use something like GitHub Actions. You can use,
Yeah.
like there's the pipeline tools, like you said, NX doesn't own the tools. So
Yeah.
like
Well, yeah, like we don't own, like we're not GitHub Actions. We're
no.
not these other things. But what we represent is a way of simplifying like the way your GitHub Actions setup looks like.
Yes.
Like at the end of the day, if you're using NX and you're like fully embracing it, you pretty much have to tell NX, hey, for my CI/CD process, run all my builds. Let's make sure everything builds. Let's make sure everything lints. Let's make sure everything tests. And once those are checked off, like NX is going to figure out, like we said, the order you'll need to do those in. We'll figure out ways of optimizing it. We'll figure out ways of like making sure you don't run stuff you don't need to run. And you'll have a CI/CD process that rivals, Cisco's at your like for your side project if you want, So that's kind of what NX represents. Let's jump to Ronnie's question, because I want to make sure we hit these questions before we wrap up.
Yeah, but, definitely.
I'll leave this one to you, actually, Laura. So are your projects or libs using tabs?
Absolutely.
Tags? How granular? All that stuff.
So we have we follow a structure of, we have data access, we have feature, we have util and UI. And then we also have sort of larger project tags where it's like, we have the main app, and then we have like the sort of, we have the library broken down into like different types of, like we have we use like service generators for our APIs and stuff. So we have a tag for that. So generated files cannot import from anything else. Like those can only be imported. Like our data access, our data access can't, like we have boundaries. So like data access can't import a feature, but a feature can import a data access. So it's basically like setting up a flow so that we don't end up with like a circular dependency where we've got libraries depending on each other. And so, yeah, we have lint rules. We enforce those with lint rules, and we have had to do education because people they just disable the lint rule. That's usually that's usually the first step. But we also, like if somebody is generating a new library, we have a track lead, like the front end leads have to approve it, right? You did it right. You didn't take all the tags out. But in general, we have to kind of, we monitor for lint, like any lint disabling, like, oh, I see that you just tell me why you did this. Like I've literally, I've had to do it before because of an existing problem. And Alex will literally like message me and be like, why did you do this? I'm like, Alex, we know about this problem. And so it's like, we definitely have people that kind of keep an eye out for disabling that. And it is an education process of just letting people know, like, these tags are here not just to annoy you, but to keep our app more like, because if you have like circular dependencies, then more tests are going to run in your pipeline. Like it slows you down. Right. And so among other things. So yeah, it's, we do use tags, and rely on them heavily. And then we actually had to introduce like a model type, and now we're talking about introducing another type as well, like a library type. And so, it's kind of, you have to be kind of flexible with them, right? And be like, okay, you know what? We tried this. It's not quite working. Let's adapt it. And I feel like that's always the case with any application, any CI/CD pipeline, any like incremental rollout of like lint rules or testing standards. Like you kind of just have to be flexible and move towards what works for you. So.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Maybe just to add something to those, like, tags are a completely optional feature of NX, so you don't have to use them. One of the advantages, if you do want to use them, is like what Laura was talking about, where we have the lint rules for you. So if you want to make certain classifications of libraries, like you can do so, and we can make sure that people aren't messing things up that way, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't need to use them. And another thing that tags could be interesting for if you're so inclined, you can actually now use tagging inside of the task runner itself. So
yes,
previously we could say like tag all projects using like a glob pattern. So if you like had called them a certain name, you can say like, I don't know, Cisco dash star. that would grab all the projects that started with Cisco dash, and like you could do things that way. But now you can actually just say, hey, select all tags, all projects with the tag like UI or something like that. So if you wanted to, you could create a classification inside of your libs that's like to supplement your CI/CD process. Like if you only need to do a certain subset, like say you have a microservice system, you want to say these things are part of one cluster. I just want to deploy that one cluster. You can do that now. So that's a possibility.
And those tags get set in the project.json. So
they do, yes. And most of our generators for whenever you create a project is going to have a tag option on it. So you can do it that way. And if you're doing like what Laura's team is doing, you can also just say, hey, actually just use the Cisco UI project generator and we'll add that tag for you automatically. Like you won't need to think about it. So are y'all doing that right now, Laura?
We have a drop down. So like we have a lib generator, and it's like you name it, you pick what project it belongs to, you pick the scope of it, and then the type. So or like somehow there's like scope, domain, type. Yeah, we have levels of tags, and then hierarchies within that.
I love how configurable that is. Let me see. Like, I don't have a generator right now that'll do it justice, but just putting up like, put up real quick, this is the Angular console again. I'll outside the comment there. But like this is a text one, I think. Yeah, these are all text ones, but you can easily put a drop down here and you can configure the options inside of that drop down too. So like it'll fit. These are the different kinds of tags we support. These are the different kinds of scopes we support. You can just do things from there. So
and then it
configurable. You'll get a nice UI for it, and you'll also be able to click dry run, and it'll tell you like what's going on.
Work? Yeah, exactly.
Did it work to do what you expected it to do?
Add your name. You forgot to add your name. So it's really great. And then we also with our drop down, if you select like a model type, we don't need a module. We're not going to run tests on our types. Like they're literally just type interfaces. So like we don't. Like we're not going to run, we don't even set up testing for those because they're not going to get tested. So
perfect. That's what you want.
Exactly. And that's why we actually had the model type, because we're like, what do we do about this? Because it's not really a utility. So where do we put this thing?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's jump into one last question here, and then I'll respond to Yadiel. So it sounds like that's specifically about me. We'll get into that later. But let's start with Eamon's best practice for how to structure your libs and directories. I'll let you go first, Laura. I have my own opinions on this. I'll see what you say first.
It's a lame answer. It's structure the way that works best for your team. But there are
boss alert. Boss alert.
Alex, no. Hold on, I'll give you all the product API keys here in a second.
Oh, young Nicholas is here too.
No. Now I'm all nervous and I'm gonna get red and blotchy. No.
Well, so pressure's on.
Yeah.
Laura.
So basically,
best practice.
It's what works best for your team. We like to separate things that access our data from our features. Utilities are going to be things that just do like I usually try to just put like pure functions in there. Like you just know how to manipulate a date to format it, or how to do this thing, and then UI is really, I think of those as like, like if you have a form button or something, like I have this very specific component that doesn't have data access or dependencies. Like it doesn't need anything injected into it. It's just a component that knows how to display a view. But other people are going to have different opinions, right? Like in other teams, that structure might not work for your team. It might work for other teams better. So,
yeah. One of the things I try to push forward is I don't want NX to be super orthodoxical. Like asking for best practices, that's great. But at the end of the day, like our tool isn't about being prescriptive about this is how you need to do stuff. Like we don't want to encourage bad practices, but we do want to keep things open so that people can structure it to fit their own opinions.
I like to think about it like the ways, like what are the kind of things that your app can do? And really I think that's why our structure works for us, is because, we have data access, and then we have, so it's like, we've kind of got things sort of isolated into the things it can do. And then when we're like, oh, well, it also can do type interfaces. So we need to consider that. And then, like I said, just being flexible. You can probably find, I know there's articles out there where people do give you opinionated ideas about how to structure your, there's always somebody's got an opinion, right?
Yeah.
But, just try. And honestly, especially if you have a smaller org, you try it. If it doesn't work, adapt.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think too. Obviously, Cisco is going to have a more mature code base. I think that's where being more opinionated on these things is actually more appropriate. And doing something like what Laura's team is doing, where actually you're codifying those best practices via the generators. And NX uses the tools to do that. Personally, like if I'm building something and I'm doing a lot of DevRel stuff, so I'm doing a lot of example apps, things that are smaller, things that are usually just me. I tend to keep things flat. I tend to avoid tags. I tend to just let's put everything in like the libs directory or make it a project directory. Let's just throw everything in there, and like the NX project graph is going to figure out that hierarchy for me. Without me manually doing it. Because as soon as you start manually doing it, you have to start manually maintaining it. So NX is like literally a escape hatch from that manual maintenance.
Sure.
I say take advantage of it.
It's like Yagni, right? Like you ain't gonna need it. Like don't do it until when it becomes a problem. like if you're gonna have an app that keeps growing and growing and growing, then think about it ahead of time. But it's like you said, small demo apps, like, I do the same thing. I'm just like, this could be pretty complex, but I'm just going to put this in here and it's going to be fine.
Yeah,
so
exactly. All right, let's go to Yadiel's comment. So let's just put it this way. Me and Angular have an interesting relationship. Laura's been there for a good bit of it. Let's see if I can find like my hexagon video here on YouTube or something. Maybe I can talk about that. I don't know. Let me see if I can find it. But yeah, here we go. Let's share the screen. Sorry, getting all finger tied here. Not trying to do personal promotion, but just to like let Yajiel know, like. I'm not. You can see the little thumbnail here. I've invested very heavily in React, or not React, in Angular from very early on. So I am like I mentioned. It's exactly like Nicholas said. My relationship with Angular it's complicated. I invested very heavily in Angular early on. I had a lot of friends in the community. I've seen a lot of them drop off, and I feel like getting to a certain point in my own engineering skill, it's like I don't need a lot of the things that Angular gives me anymore. Sure. So I've gone to React. So if I gave you, I'm sorry, Yadiel, if I gave you a weird look. Like there's definitely a new wave going on in Angular. I'm not super connected to it. I'm not super privy to everything that's going on in it. They're trying. Like one of my biggest complaints with Angular right now. Well, they're pushing forward a whole new templating.
There's a lot of really cool stuff going on in Angular, but but
it's not what I want. Like So one of the problems with Angular the whole time is that it's a very domain specific templating language. which made sense actually if you look at the history of it. Like I was there from the beginning of Angular 2. They wanted to make sure like templating your Angular templates were valid HTML, completely valid, like objective, completely valid motivation. And they did it. Like it works. It's very domain specific. Like it doesn't make sense outside of Angular, but it's valid HTML. And that's something Angular had that none of the other frameworks did. It's like actually just HTML. The JavaScript are like they're just TypeScript classes, or they're just TypeScript files, which I don't think most of the other frameworks do. Like Vue has their .vue files, Svelte has their .svelte, React, Solid, they use .tsx, which is they're both their own flavors of TSX. But I actually think TSX is pretty domain agnostic. So when I saw, okay, Angular is getting a new templating language, I thought for sure, oh, they must be going to TSX. Nope, they're doing their own domain-specific templating language again that no one else is going to know. So that's where the frustration comes in. That's where like these different things are coming in.
Yeah,
so.
It's totally fair. And it's like I feel like it doesn't. I actually talked with Jan Nicholas about this yesterday on our podcast.
Cool.
Like we're not picking between like Angular's the only good framework out there or React's the only good framework out there. Like we've got some really amazing choices that we get to use, and
exactly what Alex is saying. Like I took a very cursory look at the new templating language, and the valid HTML goes out the window, and it doesn't make sense to me. Like it's not self-explanatory when it did pass a 5-second test. What's going on with it?
Sure. Yeah. But like I was saying, like you're not picking between one good and a bunch of bad frameworks. Like there's a lot of really good choices out there. You pick the tool that you like, that works for you, that works for the project you're on, that your team is using, like that people like, like there's a lot of reasons to pick one framework over the other, but sometimes it just comes down to like, what do you know? Like, what do you know? What does your team know? What's the existing code in already, or, what do you want to learn if you're going to pick up, like if I'm going to write a example app, like I might not pick Angular. Maybe I'll pick something else just to try it out. Right. Because I think it is important to understand at least the basics of other frameworks so that like, instead of being like, I only love Angular, I'm like, no, I've worked in React and it's okay. The React app I worked in really left a bad taste in my mouth. So I'm like, I don't want to work in that again, at least not for a while, at least not without TypeScript,
Yeah. React without TypeScript is hard. I think anything without TypeScript personally for me is
hard.
Is
rough. It's
like maybe to that point, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to yuck anyone's yum. If we've got Angular fans here, Yadil, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to be rude.
I will personally beat Zach up in New York. So
thank you. I need to pay penance for this, but I do think there is something inside of me that yearns for like a JavaScript ecosystem where your front end framework actually doesn't matter that much. It feels like especially when you look at like similarities between React and Solid, they seem so similar. And there's actually like some very important differences between them in terms of like just the mental model for a component. Like for React, it's literally this is a function you call to render. For Solid, it's a function describing the entire life cycle of a component. So two very different things. Like one uses a virtual DOM and Solid doesn't. So but these things are converging, I feel like. And I hope there's a point where we'll get to where we have, more, I don't know, using the right tool for the right job. And frameworks just become one of those tools. So cool. Oh, cool. Yadiel responded here.
He's also it's complicated.
Yeah. So,
I don't have a complicated relationship with Angular because it pays my bills.
Okay, there you go. Well, lucky you, Laura. For the rest of us, we're just going to stay complicated with Angular. But
no, you're good.
The project you're working on is in Angular. I pushed on my team to have a look at NX to make our lives happier. Yep. If you listen to some of the other pieces on this, like it sounds like NX was able to really help Laura's team with like, separating out so that like you can just run tests and just run your own tests and run like the specific subset.
Clean up your part of the world at least.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some more like team autonomy. You can use code owners to enforce those even more. So yeah, let's see what Jan Nicholas has to say before we wrap up, because I know we're a bit over, but will look similar to Svelte. Okay, I don't use Svelte all that much.
I've heard this as well. I've heard this as well. Yeah. I haven't personally used Svelte, but I've also heard this. So yeah, it'll be really interesting when that. I'm not sure when they'll, because it's just an RFC right now, or did that close? I don't know. It's not on the framework yet, but it's coming. So
yeah, let's go to the ideals. So I do prefer using React. The way I tend to use it though, it's like I don't know. I am using React. Like I'll use the NX generators to set up React project, and use all those things to get things set up with Vite. Because that's just one of the options we give you with the NX generator. But at the end of the day, I'm using React I'm not so much using React as much as I'm using just JSX. And
yeah, well, that makes sense, because you're like, I think the first time I ever talked to you, you were talking a lot about functional programming and thinking about that way. So it does make sense that you would like the functions of React.
Yeah. I actually think hooks like mess with that concept so much, because like the idea of set state, for example, or use state hooks are just like, hey, remember that pure functions you had? Guess what? Like it's not pure anymore, and there's all this context. There's weird. It's not magic, but it's weird stuff around preserving context between renders. That seems like what hooks are about. So like the way I like to use React is actually using hooks as little as possible. And like I actually use RxJS to patch my way around that. So it's like React is kind of my rendering strategy.
Sure.
And then RxJS is like as events get emitted from my RxJS streams, I say, okay, like re-render now. Like just call the render function on
that makes sense. Yeah.
So,
cool.
So cool. All right. Well, Laura, thanks so much for giving us your time today. Always great to have you as a guest. We're really looking forward to having you as our MC for NX Live. Check out our YouTube channel. Check out nx.dev/conf if you want to punch yourself a ticket to watch it live remotely. Unfortunately, in-person tickets are invitation only. So unless you're cool like Laura, we won't be letting you into NYC, but you can watch it on YouTube. At least, so
you can stand out on the sidewalk with signs if you want. Like that would be pretty sweet.
That would be epic. We need to have like a street cam view, and just be like all of our
bunch
fans
of nerds out there with their NX t-shirts on.
Yeah, we need them to wave like signs, like at the wrestling events.
Like throwing like narwhal stuffed animals at us.
That's exactly what I expect. All of Times Square.
Demand. In fact, I demand it.
Yeah, that's probably the legions of NX fans.
Yeah, it's probably what's going to happen.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see y'all next time. Next week we've got a new NX Live scheduled around domain-driven design with I'm blanking on his name. What's his name? Let me pull it up real quick. It's the guy that does all the Module Federation stuff with Angular. Manfred. Sorry, Manfred Steiner. So
I was gonna say Manfred, but I'm like, if I say Manfred and I'm wrong, I'm gonna be really embarrassed. So.
No, you had it right. I've got too many names in my head floating around these days.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to seeing y'all next week. We'll look forward to seeing y'all next month at NX Live. And yeah, peace, y'all.